is an example of how justice worked in the early 1900s. My advocate comforted me with the forecast that I was almost certain to be sentenced to death. The only thing worth doing was pleading, in view of my military record and my obvious youthful ignorance, to be let off with 10 years of hard labor. I can't say I was charmed by his readiness to bury me alive, although in time I would learn that getting a tenor was practically the equivalent of being found not guilty. But from the moment the trial got underway, I could see that my lawyer had been, if anything, over-optimistic. My 3 judges put on their spectacles to study the charges. Wasting no time on what I might have to say for myself, they retired to consider their verdict. After a leisurely 5 minutes, they returned and pronounced sentence. The blood raced in my ears, but I had no trouble hearing the words, firing squad. Rather than dawdle about it for months, as the courts did in Columbus's country, the appeal my lawyer had wisely prepared in advance was already scheduled to be heard the following day. Late the next morning, I was marched back into the courtroom, this time attached to 3 other prisoners who were also appealing their sentences. Not a good sign. One look at the bench and my heart sank. The judge who would rule on my appeal were the same 3 antiques who only yesterday had sentenced me to death. It would have surprised me very much if, overnight, each of them had had a miraculous change of heart. What's more, there was no sign of my lawyer. Instead, I was furnished with a military advocate, a pudgy-handed captive whose middle bulged like a pregnant barmaid. Barely glancing in my direction, he explained to the judges that he had not had time to study my file and asked for a recess for a quick consultation with me. He took me to the adjacent room where he favored me with a well-fed smile and said, "To defend you against these terrible accusations, I must have the full truth. You understand?" Since I had no idea who this man was or which side he was working for, I was not quite ready to take him at his word. "How many men have you killed?" I did not find this a very encouraging question. Still, I answered as best I could. "Probably dozens." His eyes brightened. "In combat," I added, "it's often difficult to keep an accurate count." "Fool, I meant in Warsaw, on orders from the party." "What party?" He raised his voice. "Do you or don't you want me to defend you?" "Against what?" "Don't you know you've been sentenced to death?" "What has that to do with you?" "I'm your lawyer. I want the truth, all of it." "I told the truth yesterday, and look where it got me." "You're a damn two-faced liar." This, I confessed, provoked me. "I want nothing to do with you. If they won't let me have a proper lawyer, I'll defend myself." My defender sucked in his breath and apologized for having, perhaps, expressed himself a little too heartily. What he would not do was admit that his only job was to extract a confession from me so that the judges could put away my comrades too. Sulking, he delivered me back into the courtroom where things had begun without me. Of the prisoners to whom I had been chained, 2 had already had their death sentences confirmed and were weeping. My turn was next. The clerk read the charges against me once more. This time I listened more attentively to his monotonic reading of killings, robberies, and such, each listed according to date and location. It took me some moments before I realized that nearly all of these charges dealt with crimes committed long before I arrived in Warsaw. I tried to interrupt and point this out, but the clerk told me to be silent. It was my lawyer's job to speak for me. I looked at my defender, who was goggling at a fly that had settled on his briefcase. I called out to the court, "I don't accept the man you've assigned to me. I want a civilian lawyer. This is a military court. Here you can only be defended by an officer." "What happened to the lawyer I had yesterday?" "That was a mistake. That man had no right to defend you. He will be severely punished for misrepresenting himself." While my doomed fellow prisoners looked greatly impressed by the depth of my depravity, my alleged lawyer went through the motions of pleading with the court to show some leniency to a man who had, in battle, repeatedly proven his love for and loyalty to the Czar. True, he admitted in the same breath, I might have murdered some people in Warsaw, although perhaps not as many as the honorable court had been led to believe. But surely the real criminals were the party leaders who distorted my young mind and sent me out to commit these deeds without my fully understanding their seriousness. He dribbled on like this for I don't know how long, while the judges listened with all the patience of old men whose bladders were about to burst. The moment he was done, they scurried out to confer. A few eternal minutes later, about as long as it would have taken each one of them to have had his turn at the urinal, they were back. The general himself read the verdict. It confirmed yesterday's sentence, death by firing squad, to be carried out on the 25th of May, 1907, a date that has somehow stuck in my memory. Much as I hated to give them the satisfaction, I staggered for a moment and nearly lost consciousness.